Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to more Sins of the Father. Oh my word, I heard the most amazing thing yesterday. And you're probably not going to think that this is amazing, but I do. And it really excited me. My brother, he's a singer. He's musically inclined. And he invested in some really good recording equipment and software. And yesterday he sent me a teeny tiny little clip. I joked around with him saying, "Oh, you can record my audiobook for me." And he sent me a little teeny tiny clip of him reading a bit of my book, and it was so good. It was really, really, really good. And so we were chatting about it and looking into things, and I sent him the most recent copy and guidelines and that sort of thing of how we could potentially produce an audiobook. And he spent some time last night, like 2 hours, working on it, and did about a page and a half. It was about 4 minutes worth of reading, done really professionally. Oh my god, it gave me goosebumps. It was so good. But now he's ruined my life, of course, because now I have imposter syndrome and I can't possibly do as well as that. So yeah, this series has to end now because I can't match that. I'm joking. Of course I'm joking. We're going to carry on and read some more chapters in my subpar voice with my subpar recording equipment. But, you know, it's fine. It's fine. I'm not jealous at all. Okay, so yesterday when we left off... Oh, yes. We were at MPIA, and Olivia thinks that Mr. Ford summoned a demon and wants to investigate that a little bit further, and Parker is going to investigate his business associates, and Martha's kind of swept in and been like, yep, I know what to do, and has inserted herself into the investigation for better or worse. And so we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Chapter 18. Parking his black Empire emblazoned Honda Civic in the car park that lay alongside the art gallery, Michael Parker frowned. He knew that William Ford had a pretty stringent ties to the art and culture industry in Marytown, but didn't know why they'd gone there first. He didn't ask his new partner, however, determining that it was probably wiser to simply follow Martha's lead and see where they ended up. Her determination was very admirable, and she saw things in ways that he clearly could not. He trusted that she knew what she was doing and step in only if he felt it was necessary, which it wasn't. Yet. Inside of the entrance foyer, they were immediately approached by a young male greeter who seemed to recognise his companion and smiled warmly, saying, "Welcome back, Miss Ford. Your sister isn't working here today. Is this a recreational visit?" "No, I'm afraid not," she responded. "Is your curator here?" "Yes, Mr. White is in his office. I could show you up if you like." "Please. And it's Valentine, by the way. Martha Valentine." The greeter walked them out of the room and through the next longer exhibition hall with an enthusiastic stride that matched his apparent genuine cheer. They followed after him. Neither of them seemed to care much about the art that surrounded them. Parker understood Martha's disdain. It surely reminded her of the man whose death he was investigating, and the horrendous childhood she'd suffered at his hands. For Parker himself, he'd simply never been bitten by the creative bug. Growing up, he'd preferred subjects that he could find logic in, and preferred physical activity to creative pursuits. He could see that all of the things that had been collected and displayed within this gallery were remarkable. He simply didn't care that much about them at all. Henry White's office was on the second floor, up a narrow spiral staircase at the back of the main gallery, which led up to a balconied walkway. The young greeter knocked on the door, and then stuck his head in, announcing Martha's presence. Parker was not as surprised as he should have been that they were immediately shown inside. The man that Martha had chosen to start her investigation with was eager to see her. His smile alone when they entered the office was evidence of that unfortunate reality. There's a certain way that a man looks at a woman when they find her attractive, and the curator of the Marytown Art Gallery was evidently of the opinion that Martha Valentine was quite the alluring woman. Which was, of course, utterly true. Time had only made her more beautiful. The hard years that she'd endured turning her from a very striking teenage girl to a woman who knew who she was, and she'd flourished in spite of her tragedies. Beauty that was a hell of a lot more than skin deep. Parker was simply thrown that the two of them had met already. She'd only been back in Marytown for a day. "Hello again," the man greeted, speaking directly to her. "It's nice of you to come by. Amanda called me last night to say that she'd be taking some time off, and I assume that I have you to thank for that. She certainly wouldn't hear it from anyone else. We all tried." "Yeah, stubbornness is a family trait, I'm afraid." "Well, you can tell her from me that she can take as much time as she needs. She's an absolute asset to this gallery. The place wouldn't be the same without her, and I'm more than happy to see her finally take some respite, however it's come about. So, thank you." "I'm sure she'll be pleased to hear that." Martha brushed off its gratitude in the way she did best. She then turned slightly to acknowledge Parker, who was stood behind her, watching the whole interaction unfold. "Mr. White, this is Michael Parker. He works for the Marytown Paranormal Investigation Agency. My sister asked him to take a deeper look into her father's death, and we've come across some information that might help the investigation along." The curator frowned for a long moment before revealing what had him thrown. "I thought his death was ruled as an accident." "That is currently being debated," Parker responded, taking one of the chairs that the man indicated on the opposite side of the desk. Martha interestingly refused to sit, instead deciding to wander around the office, which was as large and spacious as the director at MPIA's office, but thrice as cluttered. Bookcases that had been crammed with ancient tomes, antiques and artworks filled every inch of wall space except for the wall right behind the curator's desk. An old painting of Marytown had been hung there, showing the town from an aerial view long before it had been modernised. A small residential town surrounded by trees, a hamlet in the hills. How well did you know William Ford?" Parker asked the owner of it all as he took a seat, folding himself into it as if it had been custom made for him, and he enjoyed the luxurious leather. "We ran in a lot of the same circles." "You were friends?" "More like acquaintances," he elaborated. Parker noticed that his dark eyes seemed to be following Martha around the room, rather than focusing on where they ought to have been. "I only met him a handful of times at events held here at the gallery. He came to practically all of them, including a showing of some of Amanda's earliest work that she did for us. I recall that he seemed very proud of her, showing her off to all of his peers, including her in his social and business interactions, making her part of the group." None of that was new information to Parker. If it was to Martha, she didn't seem inclined to let her reaction show. Not that she would be jealous of Amanda's close bond with their father. She'd given up on having a healthy relationship with him long ago. Bringing the conversation back to the purpose of their visit and away from the personal history and relationships of the Ford family within the community the victim was a prominent member of, he asked Henry White, "Did you ever do business with him?" "I bought some things for him once." "Such as?" "Antiques." He pushed. "What kind of antiques?" The curator responded, "The old kind." Parker wondered why the man was answering in such clipped responses. In his pretty extensive experience in interviewing suspects or witnesses, he knew that people intended to keep information short and simple when they had something to hide. Parker wasn't sure if that was what was happening here, or if the man was still so distracted by the other person in the room, the beautiful woman who seemed to be as distracted by his library, moving from bookcase to bookcase, that he was not paying attention to the questions. Either way, it was infuriating to witness. Trying to keep his annoyance under wraps, Parker persisted. "We believe that Mr. Ford acquired an amulet before he died." He took a close-up picture of the antique in question from the file that he'd been carrying in his hand and put it down on the desk in front of the man. A little more heavy-handed than perhaps was necessary, but it finally got his attention. "Do you recognise it?" Parker asked, a little calmer. "No," the man stated, staring at it. "I've never seen that before." "Do you have any idea when Mr. Ford might have acquired it?" "I don't." "It's strange. I can't even date it." The man stared down at the image for a bit longer, in almost the same way that Olivia had scrutinised the summoning circle on the Mr. Ford's floor. It was much more than professional interest. It showed a passion for the subject, a calling to their craft. As fascinating as Henry White found the beautiful woman in his office, he liked older, pretty things more. "You said that you work for Empire?" the curator asked Parker, not removing his attention from the picture of the talisman. "We believe that William Ford used that necklace as a way of focusing magical energy of another person to go on and use it for himself," Parker revealed. "Do you know anybody who deals in magical antiques that could be used in that way? or anyone within the cultural community with a specific interest in the occult. The occult, he repeated, sounding more than slightly amused by the question. That's not a personal interest of mine. Really, it was Martha that acknowledged the response, because there are books on the shelves that might suggest differently. I run a local art gallery and museum, he said, meeting her suspicion with a steady gaze of his own. It would be a dereliction of duty to not know about the history of the area, would it not? So, you believe that occultism is historic in Marytown? Predating the earlier construction of Blackthorn, this whole area had many ties to witchcraft and paganism, so yes, I do believe that. Very much so, in fact. It's well documented that women who were branded as witches were persecuted in these lands, and that men from all walks of life dabbled with the black arts, seeking infamy in their fortunes here. It's somewhat mythic rather than historic, I suppose, but I would suggest that it's been a part of the culture here for a very long time. So it's important, from a historical standpoint, yes, of course. Of course, she conceded, sounding a little bit impressed by his show of knowledge. Which was impressive, even Parker could admit that. What he didn't find as wonderful was the man's arrogance. He was somebody who was used to getting his way, and like so many other prominent members of the art and cultural community in Marytown, he took pride in his own standing, far too much pride. Trying to take back control of the dramatically shifting conversation, Parker asked him, "Did you ever hear or see anything that might make you think that William Ford had interests in the occult? Did you ever get that impression from him at all?" "No, I don't think so," he shook his head once again, somewhat amused by the question. He was known to be sceptic amongst those of his peers that might have those interests. I would certainly never have considered him the type to dabble with magic like that. "Oh, and what type is that?" It was again Martha posing the question, this time in a tone that Parker knew far too well. Damn it. Henry White seemed to focus upon her for a good full minute before countering her inquiry with an astute one of his own, asking her with much grace, "Have I offended you somehow, Miss Ford?" "It's Valentine," she haughtily corrected him. "I used my mother's maiden name. And no, you haven't offended me. I'd just like to know what you meant by type in your last statement." "Mixing with certain social groups you hear things," he conceded after another brief pause. There is a lot of wealth floating around Marytown and the Marytown and Blackthorn areas, and not all of the people who have it necessarily worked hard for it, if you know what I mean. "No, I don't think I do," Martha carefully hedged. "As I said earlier, I've absolutely no interest in the occult, but a lot of people around here do, and a lot of people within the art and cultural world almost certainly do. One might suggest that some of the more wealthy residents of Marytown and the area around the Blackthorn Hills came across their fortune, like those men many years ago, by dabbling in such interests. I also imagine that's why an agency like MPIA exists and does all of the good work that it does here." Parker found that he couldn't fault the man's logic, and Martha seemed to not want to try either, whether it was something that she sensed in the curator, or simply the fact that he'd been so blatant in his attentions towards her. She was not a fan either, and that realization made Parker relieved in ways he didn't want to admit. Continuing to focus on the reason they were at the gallery, he retrieved another document from his file. It was the list of names that he'd shown Martha back at Empire. Probing further, he asked Henry White, "Do you mind if we ask whether you know of any antique dealers in the area who had such interests?" Taking the list from him somewhat gingerly, the man reluctantly conceded, "All right, but I'm doing this for Amanda. If word gets out that I spread such information around, it could be bad, and not only for business. The people that deal in these sorts of artifacts are not known for being understanding or friendly to their rivals." Quick as a whip, Martha asked, "Do you have a particular person in mind, or a group, when you say that?" "Perhaps," he said, as he quickly scanned the long list. "There was somebody who I heard William Ford had been doing a fair bit of business with recently, a man who I would never have placed in the same social circle as your father, and who is well known to be able to get his hands on, let us say, dangerous antiques and artifacts. But he's not going to be willing to talk to you, Miss Valentine." "Why not?" "He runs a very exclusive club which is located here in town, and you're not his preferred gender of clientele, nor are you his type." Martha looked confused, so Parker fielded the implication on the curator's behalf by telling her, He means that this is a gentleman's only club, and that his contract doesn't like girls in that way. She made a small noise of, like girls in any way. She made a small noise of disgust and rolled her eyes, but was stubborn enough to ask Henry White, "Where is this club?" "I'll happily give you the address," he said, sounding a little bit amused again, "but I assure you that if you go there, you won't get through the door. No matter what you try, it's simply the way it is." "What about me?" Parker asked him. "Perhaps, but I doubt it." He sounded exceedingly smug. "Afterlife is exclusive, strictly members only, and you're not a member." "But you are." With a curt nod, the curator replied, "I am." Parker turned and gazed at Martha, who had her arms once again folded across her chest, her jaw locked tight in irritation and anger in her eyes. She didn't like being told what she could or could not do. With a small tilt of the head, he asked her a silent question, knowing she'd hear it because she'd always been able to hear what he was thinking, and he doubted that her psychic abilities had gotten any weaker in the years they'd been apart. After a long, long moment of what had to be stubbornness, she nodded her approval, and as reluctant as it was, he took it. Turning back around, he asked, "Are you free to take a break?" Chapter 19. Russell Beck was an off-the-books antique dealer who had allegedly had recent dealings with the man who was found dead on his driveway after summoning a demon. He also ran an exclusive gentlemen's club in the old part of Marytown. It was an interesting second vocation, which told them more than they needed to know about the man who, according to Martha, was also a misogynistic pig, an utterance that she'd angrily made several times in response to her previously expected denial of entrance at the building when they arrived. She waited outside, and Parker didn't envy the doorman his station. He'd been on the receiving end of Martha's wrath a handful of times, and it had been intimidating as hell back when she was a mere hormonal teenager who didn't actually look like she could and would punch a man twice her size, which she had threatened to do, vehemently. The club itself reminded Parker of a stately home. There was a main lounge with deep plum-painted walls and artwork that wouldn't have seemed out of place in the gallery. Tables were sparse. The seating consisted of luxurious brown leather armchairs and sofas. A little before lunch, the club was full of businessmen, shortening their working days with a drink and some gentlemanly banter. Never one for such traditions, Parker had to admit that he was finding himself in agreement with Martha that the exclusivity was not as elite as the clients wanted to believe it was. He would never go there to socialise. Fortunately for him, however, he had the right body parts and a member who was prepared to sign him into the building as a guest on the explicit agreement that Parker was discreet in his dealings with the man in charge before leaving the MPIA investigator to do his job. Parker didn't promise Henry White anything, but he would try to do his best. The gallery owner was a potential treasure trove of information, and he didn't want to cut the asset off, no matter what his personal opinion of the man might be. Either way, the curator hadn't stuck around to witness the show. His desire to keep his name out of it all ran as deep as he'd claimed. He would facilitate an introduction to Russell Beck by gaining them access to the club, and nothing more. He was simply not interested in getting involved further, which was fair enough. The main bar was crafted from dark mahogany, adorned with classic real ale pumps that had been polished until they gleamed. The male bartender, dressed in a smart black and white suit, was coiffed to within an inch of his life. He directed Parker to one of the back rooms, where the particular gentleman who owned the premises could be found, at a table with two of the men, playing cards and drinking. The elder of the three, he had shoulder-length hair that was dark blonde, dyed to hide the fact that it was grey. The jacket of his pinstripe suit was perfectly pressed, a dark tie complementing the shade. He looked every inch the debonair that he wished to portray himself as. There seemed to be equal amounts of money and prestige in both of his chosen career fields, and Mr. Beck didn't seem to be short of either, alongside a hefty dose of self-importance. Martha would absolutely despise him. Parker approached the table. As he got closer, he noticed that there were 3 tumblers of what looked like whiskey in front of the men, and an ashtray that was currently housed a fat, smouldering cigar. Tut tut, naughty naughty. Unable to help himself, he commented, "Isn't that illegal now?" "Is it?" The man shrugged his suit-encased shoulders. "I'll fetch my give-a-crap badge. Failing that, perhaps my checkbook." The blatant ego made Parker scowl in annoyance. He was yet again glad that Martha had remained outside. She would likely have made him swallow the damn thing and wash it down with a fist. Being rich doesn't put you above the law, Mr. Beck. Russell Beck glanced up, thinning pale eyebrow lifting in surprise. He smiled, the curl exposing several deep wrinkles around the corner of his mouth. Parker wasn't particularly sure if the smile was supposed to be welcoming, but it came off as conceited, maybe even a little bit lecherous, which didn't make the MPIA investigation the least bit comfortable. He indicated a nearby waiter. But of course it doesn't. Sean, could you please do me a favour and remove my ashtray from the table? Its presence is offending Mr. Parker, he answered sternly. Michael Parker. I'm with the Marytown Paranormal Investigation Agency. I'm here to talk to you about your recent business dealings with William Ford. The smirk on the man's face abruptly descended into a scowl of his own. He straightened himself up in a chair, folding and fanning the cards in his hand back out somewhat aggressively as he forcefully stated, I have absolutely nothing to say about that man. Interesting. Keeping his tone terse, Parker said, well, fortunately for me, I wasn't asking. I've reason to believe that not only did you recently have business dealings with William Ford, but you've been trading, most likely illegally, in potentially dangerous artifacts. Now I could simply leave you to your afternoon's entertainment, or you could tell me what I want to know, and I might not pass the information I've uncovered over to the appropriate authorities. Mr. Beck stared at his hand for a long time before folding them again and placing the cards face down flat on the surface of the table. Linking the long fingers of his hands together as if he were praying, he gave Parker an appraising, somewhat sinister stare before deeming him worthy of taking one of the seats that his companions had abruptly cleared, not wanting to be a part of this situation. Deciding that he didn't particularly want to play the man's game, whatever it was, Parker bluntly shook his head, declined the offer. Well, the art dealer said, disappointed, unless you're here to investigate how William Ford swindled me out of a fortune, I don't see what we have to talk about. Again interesting, but not what Parker had gone to the Afterlife Club to discuss. He asked, You know he's dead, right? Russell Beck sneered. Apparently so. We know that you recently did business with him. In particular, we're interested in what would appear to be a gold talisman, probably with magical properties, but not necessarily. It looked like this. He pulled out the appropriate photograph from the file that he'd been carrying around with him and put it on the table in front of the man, who again refused to check what the item looked like. He knew precisely what business deal was being asked about. Evident enough when he went on to derisively chuckle and muse. You might call it a business deal, or theft, or the most ill-conceived venture of my very illustrious career. You choose. The results will remain the same. Would you care to elaborate? Even though you haven't been very cordial, yes, I suppose I would. He reached down and took a healthy sip from his tumbler, probably for dramatic effect, before continuing. I was approached by William Ford 7 months ago. He was looking for an artifact that could be used to siphon magical energy from another human being and transfer the power to the person who wielded it. Rather specific and very rare. It took time and a lot of great expense on my behalf to procure such an item, which I delivered to him, as promised. And I'm guessing he never paid for it, Parker inferred. No, he did not, Russell Beck visibly seethed. Furthermore, he proceeded to inquire about other such items, and asked me if I knew anybody who would have the kind of power it would take to create amulets such as the one that I had procured. As a show of goodwill, because I expected him to be an honourable kind of gentleman that he claimed to be, I put him in touch with an old friend of mine. A magical practitioner? Yes, Mr. Beck confirmed. A very powerful one. Sensing an unpleasant twist, Parker asked, What happened? She was found dead in her home several days later. Parker cursed under his breath, shook his head, ruined the day that he thought it'd be a good idea to be the one who would not only have to uncover the true depth of the dead man's depravity, but the one to break such awful home truths to his family, one of whom would likely never get over such a thing. You believe that William Ford was responsible? He asked. I know he was, Beck said arrogantly. In the days before her death, my friend called me and admonished me for sending him her way. She claimed that he'd begun stalking her after she refused to help him, and that he was becoming increasingly aggressive in his approach. She was unnerved by it all, as you can imagine. Were the police involved in this at all? Parker pushed, seeking out some sort of timeline. Did your friend report the harassment? Oh, my dear boy, the man sounded genuinely amused. The police around here don't take matters of supernatural nature seriously. The simple existence, let alone rampant success of the agency that you work for should clearly be enough evidence of that. My friend was a practicing witch, an outsider, a freak of nature. They blamed her for many, many misdemeanors that had occurred over the years, so why on earth would she have trusted them to protect her from a violent stalker? They probably would have accused her of putting a love spell on him or some such tripe. You know what they're like. Unfortunately, Parker did, but his opinion of the way the local authorities handled paranormal cases or people with unusual abilities wasn't what he'd gone to Russell Beck to discuss. Instead, he asked, "Did you ever confront William Ford about the accusations?" "I tried to," he sounded genuinely remorseful, "but at that point he stopped taking my calls. And that woman who's not his wife claimed that he was out whenever I happened to call by the house, almost like she was protecting him. He pointedly and deliberately avoided me, right until his unfortunate and untimely death." "Mr. Beck," Parker hedged reluctantly, "I have to ask you, did you have anything to do with that?" "I wish," the man scoffed. Parker utterly believed him. "But no, I did not kill William Ford. To do so would have meant defunding myself of far too much money that I could and would have reclaimed from him one way or another. We operated in the same circles, he and I, so he would have paid up eventually, or risked being ruined as a well-loved pillar of the community." "And what did he do to your friend?" And what he did to your friend? "I believe in karma, Mr. Parker. It seems to me like William Ford got exactly what he had coming. Funny how that happens." Indeed it was. While he was utterly convinced that Russell Beck had nothing to do with the man's death, Parker wasn't satisfied with the responses he'd been given, as earth-shattering as they ultimately were. If he wanted more, this was not the place to gather factual information, and he wanted to be certain of the accusation before he so much as considered revealing it to Martha or her poor younger sister. He would need to make contact with the police again. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Beck," he said to the bombastic owner of the Gentleman's Club, retrieving the image he'd placed on the table. "For the record, you can confirm that this was the necklace that William Ford stole from you?" "The very same," he confirmed with a very firm nod. "Say, out of curiosity, do you think I might be able to have it back?" "Yeah, that's not really how it works. But I'm sure that once our investigation's over, you'll be able to take that matter up with the local station. As far as they're concerned, it's evidence of at least one murder. Now perhaps two, thanks to you. You should feel proud of yourself." "Oh, I'm just brimming with local spirit," the older man said, taking another pointed slug of his whiskey, and leaving Parker with no doubt that even if he could get the talisman back into its rightful owner's hands, he never would. Too much damage had been done over the thing, the extent of which was yet to be fully uncovered. "I shall show myself out," he said, lest the man escort him to the door and meet the young woman who would very much like to ask him a few rather painfully delivered questions of her own. "Well, it's been a delight," Russell Beck cheerfully intoned. "I shall put your name on the guest list should you ever feel need to call by again. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Parker." "I know I will." Okay, it's another 2 chapters down. Some revelations there. Things are starting to unfold with the investigation, and Parker may have stumbled across something that is really not very nice and paints the dead man in an even poorer light than he perhaps has already been painted in. But we will continue with that tomorrow. And it's been a couple of chapters now. It's been about 3 or 4 chapters in Parker's perspective. But we will be getting back to Martha tomorrow. When I first started writing this series, it was in first person, and it was all from Martha's perspective. And I realised that as it evolved, that I wanted to get other characters more in the spotlight, and I wanted them to have. I have apparently left Google on, and Google's trying to talk to me. No, thank you, Google. It's got nothing to do with you. Shut up. Hang on. Give me 1 second. Shut all that up. Silly Google. Oh, what was I saying? Yeah, I wanted to give other characters a little bit more of a spotlight, and in changing it to third person perspective, also give a little bit more of an insight into Martha and things. She's, as we start off, she's quite closed off, and I really liked the idea of looking at her through other characters' perspectives. And in these few chapters, you can kind of see from the perspective of someone who knew her before and has known her quite well, how well or not she is perhaps dealing with what's going on around her and how she's struggling to keep it all together. So yeah, but we will be getting back to Martha's perspective in the next chapters, and when we come back and see how she handles things that have come out and where we go from here. So thank you as always for listening to me ramble on. I feel like I have the weight of my brother's amazing professional reading in my head and on my shoulder, pressing down. I'm just joking. I'm just joking around. So that's it, really. I don't think I have anything more to say than that. I hope everybody has a really good day. It's quite nice again. All this lovely weather while we're stuck indoors. Though saying that, things have been relaxed a little bit and we can actually go out a little bit further to get some exercise and have some fun. So I suspect that we're going to be doing that later on today. Get out and get some nice fresh air. So take care, everybody, wherever you are in the world and whatever your current situation is. And I will be back tomorrow to read more Sins of the Father. Bye.